Hi guys, so lesson 3 on our invention problem solving Kaizen project. Last lesson I got to this stage where I had this prototype. I've messed around with it a bit and I've tried to add some elastic bands to give it some flexibility in the positions that it works in, but at the moment it's just sort of, as you can see, a bit dangerous, just flying off in different directions. As it's designed to hang like this, what this does allow it to do is hold in this position or lock to a couple of other positions, but at the moment it needs some finessing, and obviously elastic bands aren't ideal for a final thing, and we don't want the phone flying off in other directions like that. Today I'm going to do some making in wood. Remember, you won't necessarily have any materials at home to do this, but this is all revision for your GCSE. So I'm going to be talking about different types of wood that I can use, different joints, different joining processes, wasting processes, addition processes, all relating to keywords and key facts you need to know for GCSE. So if you feel that you've exhausted the design stage of this by doing sketches and developed sketches, then you can watch the video and you can make notes on joining techniques or add annotations to your existing sketches explaining how you would make them in the future, and that's all really valuable revision. So in terms of making our product, I'm going to think about what woods I could use. Now, I'm going to cut some fairly small and detailed comb joints, which are an interlocking joint, where for this one I'm going to have 2 prongs either side and then another central piece, so it'll create a pivot action like that, which you saw on the existing card model. Now, I could use a softwood like pine or spruce. Softwood is better in terms of sustainability because it grows very quickly from trees with needles like pine trees. They grow much faster, so it's much easier to replenish the stock of trees. However, I'm using reclaimed hardwood. This actually comes from science workbenches that were ripped out of the school in about the 90s. Before they had things like manufacture board, like MDF and chipboard, for any kind of hard-wearing furniture, they had to use hardwood. So I've taken some of this. You can see the original finish on there and scratches. Some of it's even got graffiti on. And I'm going to use a few tools to get that into a workable state. I've actually ripped these sections down when I was still able to go to work on a circular saw. So I've cut them into strips that are 30 by 20 mil, so that is ideal. I did that before I left work, knowing I'd have to make some stuff, and I didn't have a circular saw at home that would cut through that. So I'm going to choose hardwood over softwood for this because it's got a much higher level of density. So the grain is a lot denser, it's a lot heavier. Not the case for all hardwoods. Balsa is actually a hardwood. It's incredibly soft, but this is mahogany, and mahogany is nice and dense, and I've used it before for this type of joinery, and I'm going to be able to achieve a much higher level of accuracy. Okay, so we're looking at marking out comb joints. The way to do this is I've got my steel ruler and my tri-square. I'm going to mark this out and divide it into thirds, first of all. Okay, and at this stage I could use a tool called a marking gauge. So a marking gauge has got a series of pins on it, and you can set your width like this and clamp it, and then the pin will score into the work a line, and I know that it will be completely consistent on this piece and this piece. Obviously, if you haven't got a marking gauge, you can just use a ruler and a pencil, but just make sure it's really accurate. Now, each joint needs to go in by the width of the wood generally. If I was doing a tight comb joint, also known as a box joint, if I were to do a tight comb joint, I would only want it to go the depth of the wood, but actually I want some articulation in this, so I need to make it longer in the first instance. So I'm just going to make it about 50 mil, so I've got plenty to play with, because I've got some excess wood here. And then use the tri-square to get a nice neat line. I'm now going to remove the centre from one and the 2 sides from the other. Okay, so I've got my comb joint now. I've rounded the edges off. I've got plenty of clearance. If it was not longer, it would catch. If I tried to turn it, it wouldn't be able to rotate, or if these ends were square. So I'm going to have enough room there so it'll rotate nice and smoothly. I'm now going to drill through here, and I'm going to just show you the basic sort of drilling technique that you would use on this type of thing. So you want to do what's called a pilot hole first. That's just a hole that will guide it through. So I'm going to decide my position. I've drawn these circles, these semicircles by eye. So I'm just going to mark it by eye. So I'm just going to centre that with a bradawl just so I've got a point to work with. If this was metal, you would use a centre punch. And then I'm initially going to go through that with a 3mm so that I've got a nice sort of guideline. I need to make sure it's perfectly straight in all dimensions. So I need to make sure my drill is straight that way as well as that way. So I'm actually going to have to do this off camera. Okay, so I've got my pilot hole running through there. I placed this one inside so it would run through and be perfectly aligned, and that's running through nicely. Now I want to think about what size hole I actually need to run through. So I'm going to use what's referred to as some bought-in components. So these are things that I'm not making myself. That could be anything from an elastic band to a screw. In this case, it's bolts and wing nuts. So with the wonders of eBay, I've still been able to get stuff. So I've got a bolt and a wing nut. Now using a wing nut is going to allow me to tighten this and change the position of it. So I've got an M6 bolt, so it's 6mm, an M6 wing nut, and I need to drill a 6mm hole to run through there. So I'm just going to change my hole to 6mm, my drill bit, sorry, not my hole. And then I'm going to run through each hole. And now I can place my wing nut through the middle, my bolt, sorry, through the middle. And tighten that up. Now, at the moment, that isn't tightening enough. Now, the reason for that is this joint here is too loose. This needs to be able to clamp down onto the piece of work. So I either need to experiment with tightening it more, making this gap tighter in this joint here, or having this bit longer so it allows the piece of wood to stretch in more tightly. The other option is I can place a washer on the inside. So I'm just going to have a fiddle around with that and finesse it so I can make sure it works. Let's see if I can just do it by tightening it. I don't want to break it. No. So that's the basis of what we're looking at today. I will put up the key words at the end so you can make notes, but you will have seen the things pop up throughout of the key comments to write down for revision. But you can see so far it's working except for the lack of grip. So, as you can see from my efforts earlier, it's not perfect. There's some trial and error involved. I've managed to get it all finished off now, having learned from that first mistake of making them too loose, the joints there. So, it works perfectly now. It's got nice, tight articulation in all 4 points. That means I can move it and change the position. I've decided to go for this longer arm in the centre because actually I've got quite a lot of distance and it doesn't need to have so many points of articulation. It's very stiff at the moment, but obviously I can adjust it using those wing nuts. In the next video, I've thought about making the stand slightly differently. It doesn't need to be as big as I originally thought. I think that'd be quite cumbersome. So I'm going to think about making something on the lathe. Using a lathe is quite an important thing to understand for your GCSE. You may have never used one, and you may never use one during year 10, but you might have a question on how it works. So I'm going to do a video demonstration on the lathe and how it works, and show you how I'm going to make a base to lock into here that will be multifunctional and will allow me to have a third axis of rotation by having a pivot point with a dowel joint in there. So yeah, I hope you've made the notes that came up on the screen for your revision purposes. If you've got practical stuff to have a go at doing some of these joints, then fantastic. But if not, remember, it's all good revision stuff. Cheers.